Hello, I'm Darren Magee and welcome to my Mental Health Information and Awareness channel. Today's topic asks if I would discuss virtue signaling and is it a sign, a red flag for narcissism. So first I'm going to look at what virtue signaling is, why we indeed, all of us do it on some level, how the term is used, and then I'll answer the question, is it a sign of narcissism? So if you like this video, please check out my other videos on mental health related topics and please consider subscribing to my channel. But just as a reminder, this video is for information purposes only. It is not meant as a substitute for support from a mental health professional, nor is it a tool to be used to diagnose someone. Now, the earliest reference I can find to the term virtue signaling is in 2015 in an article written in The Spectator by James Bartholomew, where he described it as an increasingly common phenomenon of indicating that you're kind, decent and virtuous. Now skip forward a few years. It's being defined as the action or practice of publicly expressing opinions or sentiments intended to demonstrate one's good character or the moral correctness of it. In near terms, I would say it's just a way of showing someone your political correctness. And I think it's a term that's become like a lot of other terms. It's like narcissist, snowflake, woke. It does really mean something, but it's become a label. It's used without any real thought as to what it really means. It's used as a way sometimes just to shut things down, to insult, to humiliate. But it's often done in a way that makes the accuser seem morally, intellectually superior or justified. And the paradox being, when someone calls someone else out for virtue signaling, they're actually doing it themselves. So the term has become, as I say, something of a put down, accusing someone of pretending to be virtuous rather than have a genuine interest or concern for a particular issue. So think of the term signaling. Showing everybody. If you want to help someone, for example, you want to help someone cross the road, you want to perform some act of charity, you want to be decent to others, that's entirely up to you, not necessarily a bad thing. Why do others have to know about it? Well, we are social creatures. We like to fit in. We like to be liked. We like others to think well of us. You know, we join movements. We join campaigns that we feel passionate about. On social media, a campaign begins. People change their profile picture, they show support, solidarity for that cause, they share posts, sign petitions, they ask others to sign petitions as well. I would say that's virtue signaling. However, I would say it as a description, not as a label. It's not necessarily done in a manipulative, hey, check me out, aren't I wonderful kind of way. Because in many cases, it's because that cause is quite a worthy one, it's quite a good one, and the people feel passionate about it. That's why they do that. They want others to get involved as well. They want others to support that cause, follow that belief. It's not about getting others to praise them for doing it. Because what seems to be happening is someone could be accused of virtue signaling, say if they attend an equal rights march, a protests to support a group that they don't belong to. They're accused of virtue signaling. A huge multinational company might be accused of virtue signaling if they, say, publicly commit to equal pay for all their staff or to reduce their carbon footprint. A government could be accused of virtue signaling because they pledge to do something to maybe help a section of the population that are disadvantaged somehow. In other words, the term is used to describe those who are they're deemed to pretend or relish even at being outraged at something they see as morally wrong, but have nothing to do with it themselves. They're not affected by it themselves. And as much as that may be so in many cases, the term is often used in a way that devalues somebody, devalues that person or that group's opinion, that belief, that campaign. It's as if there's something wrong with them by showing that they care. It's a way of bringing someone's intent, bringing their character into question. And it works both ways, because you think of two sides of an argument. You have somebody who demands the health service get more funding. You know, people are sick, people are dying, they're waiting on treatment. Doctors, nurses, the staff, you know, they're at breaking points. So the service needs more funding, it needs more resources. You know what? There is merit in that argument. But then you get someone else who says that the resources, the funding it does get, could be used better. It could be used more efficiently. There should be less waste. Do you know what? I can see merit in that argument as well. But what you get sometimes is that both sides don't see it that way. Neither side sees it that way because their way is right. So they will either accuse the other of virtue signalling, or they will accuse them of being, say, a right-wing fascist who hates the poor or whatever. Either way, what they're doing is they're trying to achieve their own sense of virtue through hatred, destroying the other's character, bringing the other's morality into question. So when something is interpreted through our own prejudice, through our own belief system, it's given a label. It's often given labels like, say, virtue signaling or narcissistic or woke. When you think of things like social media, let's look at that, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else happens to be out there. Social media is awash with people sharing their opinions, and they're usually, not all the time of course, but usually social, political, or something they're having to overcome, but they're doing it in a way to gain praise, sympathy, or influence. Chances are you're never going to see a post saying something like, I cheated on my partner today, it was great, I stole money from the church collection plate, good for me. And I must admit, my guilty pleasure is sometimes reading some of these posts. Particularly the enlightened, the overnight social justice warrior who's very concerned about whatever happens to be topical at the moment, and how others seem to lack social awareness or moral fibre to care. I think a really good indicator is they tend to drop those topics as quickly as they pick them up, as soon as they go out of fashion. So back to the question, is virtue signalling a sign of narcissism? Well, I'd say it certainly is a common trope of narcissism, but it's often how it's done. Now, think of the difference, for example. Think of the difference between, hey, look at my new Porsche. Isn't it amazing? I bet you all wish you were me. Think of the difference between that and, look at my new Porsche. God has really blessed me. I feel so humble and grateful. Saying the same thing, but both are going to evoke something different, aren't they? The thing to remember with narcissism as well is, remember, narcissism is often a component of something else that's going on. And according to recent research from the University of British Columbia, and I'll put a link to that research into the description, individuals with traits of being on the dark triad were frequently showing signs of virtue signaling. Now, I've made a video on the dark triad before. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. But just to recap, in the dark triad, there are strong traits of psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism, but not enough to be able to make, say, a clinical diagnosis in just one of those areas. The Machiavellianism, that's the manipulative characteristic. Now, the research showed that those who were showing themselves as a victim, that can lead to positive attention. It can lead to other transferring resources to them, paying them attention, especially when they're portrayed as a virtuous victim. And this is where I believe it can be a very effective way. That virtue signaling as a virtuous victim is a very effective way of recruiting flying monkeys. Do you think of social media? Combine that with a culture that says only victimhood gives their right to comment on a certain issue. You know what? That's a perfect platform for self-promotion, duplicity, intellectualism, emotional callousness, and indeed the exploitation of others' good nature, as well as shaming them. A common characteristic of narcissism, remember, they tend to believe their own lies, but they want others to believe them as well. Do you know what? There's no point in being virtuous and generous if no one gets to see it. There is no point in travelling to that faraway land to present someone with a guide dog or a wheelchair unless there's pictures out there on social media, and they get to talk about how humbled they were by the experience. In what I would say extreme cases with virtue signaling, certainly in the context of narcissism, which generally needs to self-promote, but self-promote and destroy others at the same time, it can be vocalized as moral outrage, calling it things like misogyny, fascism, oppression. Because to some, remember, it seems easier to point out other people's bad things, other people's bad points, than either trying to change their mind. Change their mind through debate, through reason, perhaps coming to some kind of a compromise or at least some kind of understanding. And in those cases, I think this is where we get into sometimes yet another label that's being used, and that's cancelling, the cancel culture. Now, I've made a video before on exploring the links between cancel culture and vindictive narcissism. I often characterize that by saying, you know, my noble outrage is justification that these people are beyond redemption. They must be cancelled. They must be socially, emotionally, financially ended. And with narcissism, virtue signaling can also be a form of gaslighting, leading others to believe that they are in error, they are at fault, they're bad for not seeing things their way. You know, how can this person be bad, manipulative? How can they be abusive? Look at them, they're in church all day, every day, twice on a Sunday. They feed hungry swans. They're part of a particular social justice movement. And they are so wounded and virtuously offended when they're called out. So in conclusion, I would say, as helpful as it can be to give something a name, in the sense that we all know how to identify it, it's not so helpful when it's used as a blanket term, just to describe something we don't like or disagree with. When it's used to devalue someone or to just shut something down. I mean, you think about it, who actually gets to decide what is moral? Who gets to decide what someone else's motives are? You know, we may have a good idea, but actually none of us are mind readers. And I'm not really so sure that shaming someone or trying to bamboozle them with intellectualism is the best way to bring someone round to a particular way of thinking. Neither is pointing out someone else's perceived un-PC comment or belief just to look more enlightened and progressive. And you know what, just as this video comes to an end, you know what's just come to mind? It could be said that in making this video, that I'm virtue signaling. Well, do you know what? Maybe I am, who knows? So there are my thoughts on virtue signaling and it being a trope of narcissism. If you have any comments or thoughts, questions of your own, please use the comment box below. I do like reading them, responding to them whenever I can. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel for future updates on mental health related topics. And until next time, thanks for watching.